from George Ivanovich Gurdjieff's All and Everything. Chapter 42, Beelzebub in America. Reading 5. As a physician, you will, I think, probably be greatly interested to know how and why this same question interested me so much several years ago, and to what conclusions I arrived after I had, in a relatively normal state, very seriously observed and studied it. About 5 years ago, I had such a fit of depression that even alcohol scarcely had any effect on me, nor pacified my psychic state. And it so happened just then that I often met with certain acquaintances and friends who talked a great deal about filthy diseases and how easily one could be infected with them. From these conversations, I myself began thinking rather often about myself, and little by little I began fretting about my health almost like an hysterical woman. I used often to reflect that being almost always drunk and constantly having affairs with such infected women, then evidently, even if for some reason or other I had so far no obvious symptoms of these diseases, I must nevertheless, in all probability, be already infected with one of them. After such reflections, I first began consulting various specialists in order to find out what were the early symptoms of whatever disease I already may have had. Although none of the local specialists found anything at all in me, I nevertheless continued to doubt, because on the one hand my fretting about my health, and on the other hand my own common sense, continued to assure me that I must certainly already have been infected with one of these terrible diseases. All this brought me to the point that I decided at any expense to have a consultation here in Paris, but this time with the leading specialists from the whole of Europe. I could afford myself this because, owing to the World War, when transport had everywhere broken down and all commodities had gone up in price, our firm, having everywhere very large stocks of dried fruit in storage, had that year made considerable profits, a fairly good portion of which fell to my share. When I had called these European celebrities together, they unanimously pronounced, after all kinds of very detailed investigations and what are called chemical analysis, known to them themselves, that there was not the slightest sign of any venereal disease in my organism. Although this finding of theirs put an end to the chronic fretting about my health, yet it was the cause of the growth in me of such a strong feeling of inquisitiveness and curiosity to clear up this question, that from then on it became a sort of mania with me, a kind of idea fixe. And also from then on, the serious observation and study of everything concerning these diseases animated and justified the sense of what I have called my odious life. During this period of my life, I made these observations and studies of mine at all times with my whole inner real eye, while in a drunken, semi-drunken, and also sober state. And then, among other things, I also read assiduously every kind of literature existing here in Europe concerning these diseases, and also most of the books on this question in French and German. This I could easily do because, as you see, I have such a command of French that you can scarcely guess that I am not a real French intellectual. And with the German language also I get along very well, because I lived a fairly long time in Germany and always, in my free time, studied their language and their literature for want of something to do. So, when I became interested in this question, I was able to become fully acquainted with all the knowledge that exists in contemporary civilization on the subject of venereal diseases. In this literature, there appeared to be hundreds of theories and hundreds of hypotheses concerning the causes of venereal infection, but I could not discover one convincingly categorical explanation how and why some people are infected with these diseases and others not. and I soon became convinced that I could not clear up this for myself with the knowledge existing on this question at the present time here in Europe. From all this literature, putting aside, of course, and not even mentioning the multitude of these thick scientific books here, whose contents immediately show every more or less normal person that they were written by people who were, as is said, complete ignoramuses on those questions, that is to say, not specialists in human diseases at all, I got the general impression that people were infected and fall ill with venereal diseases only owing to their own uncleanliness. When I made this categorical deduction, there was nothing left to me but to concentrate all my attention upon finding out in what my personal cleanliness particularly consisted, which had so far protected me against infection. I then began to deliberate with myself as follows. I do not dress any more cleanly than everybody else living here in Europe. I wash my hands and face every morning also like everybody else. Once a week I make a point of going to a Turkish bath, also it seems like everyone. And in this way I turned over many things in my mind, and with the result I found nothing in which in this respect I was exceptional. And yet the fact remained that from my loathsome life I, of course, ran more chances of being infected. From then on my thoughts were guided by two definite convictions already fully established in me. In the first place, that anyone having relations with such women must inevitably sooner or later be infected, and secondly, that only cleanliness protects one from such infection. In this manner I continued to reflect for a whole week, until I suddenly remembered a certain habit of mine which, here in Europe, I always scrupulously concealed from my acquaintances. I remembered, namely, about the habit of mine which is called among us in Persia abdest. This custom of abdest, which, according to the notions here, might be called ablution, is one of the chief customs among us in Persia. Strictly speaking, every follower of the Mohammedan religion must obey this custom, though it is practiced particularly strictly only by Mohammedans of the Shiite sect, and as almost the whole of Persia is composed of Shiites, the custom is nowhere so widely spread as among us in Persia. This custom is that every adherent of the Shiite sect, male as well as female, must, after every toilet, unfailingly wash his sex organs. For this purpose, every family has the necessary appurtenances, considered among us even as the most important, consisting of a special vessel, a particular kind of bowl called a burk. And the richer the family, the more of these bowls they must have, since such a bowl must at once and without fail be put at the disposal of every newly arrived guest. I myself was from early childhood also personally accustomed to this habit, and it gradually so entered into my daily life that even when I came here to Europe, where this custom does not exist, I could not live a single day without making this ablution. For instance, it is much easier for me to go without washing my face, even after a debauch, than not to wash certain parts of my body with cold water after the toilet. At present, living here in Europe, I not only have to put up with a great many inconveniences owing to this habit of mine, but I even have to forego some of the modern comfort which I could easily afford. For instance, I now live in Paris, where, owing to my means, I could well afford to live at the very best hotel, with every modern comfort. But thanks to this habit of mine, I cannot do this, but am obliged to live in some dirty hotel, situated far from the center, and from all those places where I have to be almost every day. In the hotel where I now live, there are no comforts beyond this single comfort, which is very important for me, and this is due to the fact that, being of old construction, this hotel has water closets of the old type, and not of the new contemporary American invention, and it is just that old system which is the most convenient and suitable for this habit of mine. It is quite likely that I even half-consciously chose France as my chief dwelling place because it is still possible to find everywhere here, especially in the provinces, water closets of the old system as among us in Persia. In other countries of Europe, this, as they now call it, Asiatic system, scarcely exists. It has almost everywhere been exchanged for the American system with its comfortable, polished, easy chairs, upon which I, personally, could only rest and read the book called the Decameron. And so, my honorable doctor, when I suddenly remembered this habit of mine, I at once understood without any further doubt that if I had hitherto escaped being infected with some filthy disease, it was solely because I frequently washed my sex organs with cold water. Having said these last words, this sympathetic young Persian extended his arms upwards and with his whole being exclaimed, "Blessed forever be the memory of those who created for us that beneficial custom." He said nothing further for a long while, but looked pensively at a party of Americans sitting nearby, who were discussing at that moment whether women dressed better in England or in America. And then he suddenly turned to me with the following words: "My highly esteemed and honorable doctor, during my acquaintance with you, I have become quite convinced that you are very well educated and, as is said, very well read. Will you be so kind as to give me your weighty opinion, so that I might at last understand and solve one problem which during recent years has aroused my curiosity, and which, when I am comparatively sober, often arises in me and disturbs my thoughts? The point is that living here in Europe, where people profess the religion whose followers compose almost half the world, I have not up to now come across a single good custom in their ordinary life, whereas among us who profess the Mohammedan religion there are very many. What is wrong? What is the cause of it? Were there no good ordinances foredesigned by the founder of that great religion for the ordinary life of people, the followers of that religion? Well, my boy, as this young Persian had become sympathetic to me during our acquaintance, I could not refuse him this request, and I decided to explain the question to him, but also, of course, in such a form that he would not even suspect who I was and what was my genuine nature. I told him, "You say that in the religion which half the world professes, and you probably mean the Christian religion, there are not such good customs as your Mohammedan religion? Are there not? On the contrary, in that religion there were many more good customs than in any of the religions of today. In none of the ancient religious teachings were so many good regulations for ordinary everyday life laid down as in just that teaching on which the same Christian religion was founded. If the followers of this great religion themselves, especially those who are called the elders of the Church of the Middle Ages, treated this religion step by step, as Bluebeard treated his wives, that is to say, put them into derision and changed all their beauty and charm, that is already quite a different matter. In general, you must know that all the great genuine religions which have existed down to the present time, created, as history itself testifies, by men of equal attainment in regard to the perfecting of their pure reason, are always based on the same truths. The difference in those religions is only in the definite regulations they lay down for the observance of certain details and of what are called rituals. And this difference is the result of the deliberate adoption by the great founders of these regulations, which suited the degree of mental perfection of the people of the given period. At the root of every new doctrine upon which religions are founded, dogmas are always to be found, which have been taken from earlier religions and which had already been well fixed in the life of the people. And in this case, the saying is fully justified, which has existed among people from of old: there is nothing new under the sun. The only things new in these religious teachings, as I have said, are the small details, intentionally adapted by the great founders to the degree of mental perfection of the people of the given epoch. And so, as the root of this same doctrine upon which the Christian religion is based, there was placed almost the whole of the previously existing great teaching, which is now called Judaism, whose followers once also numbered, almost as is said, half the world. The great founders of the Christian religion, having taken the Judaic doctrine as their basis, changed only its outer details according to the degree of mental development of the contemporaries of Jesus Christ, and in it they effectively provided for everything necessary for the welfare of people. Provision was made in it, as is said, both for the soul and for the body, and it even provided all the necessary regulations for a peaceful and happy existence. And this was all surpassingly wisely provided for in such a way that this religion might be suitable also for people of much later epochs. Had the doctrine of this religion remained unchanged, it might even perhaps have suited these contemporary people who, by the way, our Mullah Nasser ad-Din defines by his expression, "He will blink only if you poke his eye with a rafter." At its origin, there entered into this Christian religion, besides those specially established regulations for ordinary existence, which met the needs of the contemporaries of Jesus Christ, also many excellent customs which were already in existence and had become well fixed in the life of the people who were followers of the Judaic religion. Even those good customs which now exist among you in the Mohammedan religion were transmitted to you from the Judaic religion. Take, for example, just that custom of sunniyat, or circumcision, which you mentioned. This custom was at first contained in this Christian religion also, and in the beginning was obligatorily and strictly carried out by all its followers. Only subsequently did it very quickly and suddenly entirely disappear from the Christian religion. If you wish, my young friend, I will tell you in detail about the arising of this custom, and you will understand from it why a custom so good for the health and normal life of people was included in the Judaic religion, and since the Judaic doctrine was made the basis of the Christian religion, this custom also could not fail to be taken over and introduced into the process of the ordinary life of the followers of the Christian religion. This custom, which you call sunniyat, was first created and introduced into the Judaic religious doctrine by the great Moses. And why the great Moses introduced this custom into the religion of the Judaic people, I learned from a very ancient Chaldean manuscript. It was said in this manuscript that when the great Moses was the leader of the Judaic people and conducted them from the land of Egypt to the land of Canaan, he constated the fact during the journey that among the youths and children of the people confided to him from above, there was very widely spread the disease then called Murdorten, which contemporary people call onanism. It was further said in the manuscript that, having constated this fact, the great Moses was greatly perturbed and from then on began observing very closely in order to discover the causes of this evil and some means of uprooting it. These researches of his led this incomparable sage later to write a book under the title of Tuka Tes Nalul Pan, which in contemporary language means the quintessence of my reflections. With the contents of this remarkable book, I also once happened to become acquainted. At the beginning of the explanation about the disease Murdorten, it was said, among other things, that the human organism has been brought by great nature to such perfection that each and every organ has been provided with the means of defense against every external contingency, and hence that if any organ should function incorrectly in people, it must always be the people themselves who are to blame, owing to their own established conditions of everyday life. And concerning the causes themselves of the appearance of Murdorten, among children, it was said in chapter 6, verse 11 of this incomparable book that this disease occurs in children for the following reasons. Among the definite substances elaborated by the human organism and constantly thrown off by it as waste, there is a definite substance called kulnabo. This substance is in general elaborated in the organism of beings for the purpose of neutralizing other, also definite substances necessary for the functioning of their sex organs, and it is formed and participates in the functioning of the said organs from the very beginning of the arising of the beings of both sexes, that is to say, from their infancy. Great Nature has so arranged it that after its utilization, the residue of this substance is discharged from the organism of boys at the place between the tul totino and the sarnuonino, and in the girls from the places between the Cartotocnian hills. The parts of the organism of boys located at the end of what is called the genital member, and which are named in this incomparable book, Tulk Totino and Sarnuonino, are named by contemporary medicine there glans penis and prepuce penis, and the Cartotocnian hills, covering what is called the clitoris of girls, are called labia majora and labia minora, or, as is said in common language, the large and small obscene lips. For the substance, kulnabo, contemporary medicine has no name at all, this independent substance being entirely unknown to it. Contemporary terrestrial medicine has a name only for the general mass of those substances, among which is also the substance kulnabo. And this total mass is called smegma, a composition of entirely heterogeneous substances secreted by various what are called glands, which have nothing in common with each other, as for instance the Grease gland, the Bartholinian gland, the Cooperian, Neolnian, and others. The separation and volatilization of these waste substances should, in accordance with the providence of Great Nature, be induced for the said places by means of all kinds of chance contacts and by various movements occurring in the atmosphere. But unforeseen by nature, the clothing which people have invented for themselves prevent the said factors from freely effecting the separation and volatilization of these substances, with the result that this kulnabo, remaining for a long time on these places, promotes the arising of perspiration. Moreover, as this substance is in general the very best medium for the multiplication of what are called bacteria, which exist in the atmosphere as well as in what are called the subjective spheres, of all kinds of things coming into direct contact with the children, there occurs from this multiplying there on the given parts of the organism of children a process called itching. On account of this itching, children begin, unconsciously at first, to rub or scratch these places. Later, as there are concentrated in these parts of the organism all the ends of the nerves created by nature for the special sensation required for the completion of the sacred process almuano, which normally arises in adult people at the end of what is called copulation, and as especially at a certain period when, according to the providence of Great Nature, there proceeds in these organs of children a process of preparation for future sex functioning. They experience from this rubbing or scratching a certain peculiar or pleasant sensation. They therefore begin intentionally, having instinctively realized from which of their actions this pleasant sensation is evoked in them, to rub these places even when there is no itching, and thus the ranks of the little Mordortenists on the earth are always increasing by leaps and bounds. As regards just what measures the great Moses took for eradicating that evil, I learned not from the aforementioned book Tuka Tes Nalulpan, but from the contents of an also very ancient papyrus. From the contents of this papyrus, it could be clearly seen that the great Moses gave practical effect to the thought set down on this question in the book Tuka Tes Nalulpan. By creating for his people those two religious rites, one of which is called Sikt Ner Chorn and the other Tzel Putz Khan. The sacred Sikt Ner Chorn was specially created for boys, and the sacred Tzel Putz Khan for girls, and they were to be obligatorily performed on all children of both sexes. The rite of Sikt Ner Chorn, for instance, was identical with your Sunyat. By cutting what is called the Vogiano, or the frenum penis of boys, the connection is severed between the head and the skin covering it, and thus there is obtained the free movement of this skin, or as it is called, prepuce penis. According to the information which has come down to us from ancient times, and also according to our common sense, it is plain that the great Moses, who, as we learned from another source, was a very great authority on medicine, wished by this means to secure that the totality of substances accumulating in the said places might of itself be mechanically removed owing to all kinds of accidental contact, and thus cease to become a factor for the arising of the mentioned maleficent itching. Concerning the vast learning of the great Moses in the province of medicine, many diverse historical sources agree that he obtained his medical knowledge during his stay in Egypt as a pupil of the Egyptian high priests, to whom this knowledge had come down from their ancestors of the continent Atlantis, the first and last genuinely learned beings of the earth, the members of the society then called Akodan. The beneficial results of the customs then created by the great Moses even now continue to be fairly visible in practice. Concerning, for instance, the custom of circumcision in particular, I, being a good diagnostician and able to tell from one glance at a man's face what disharmony he has in his organism, can safely say that this terrible children's disease of onanism is scarcely ever found among those children upon whom this rite has been performed, whereas the children of those parents who fail to observe this custom are almost all subject to it. The exceptions in this respect are only the children of those parents who are indeed cultured in the full sense of the word, and who clearly understand that the future normal mentation of their children depends exclusively upon whether they do or do not contract this disease in their childhood or youth. Such cultured parents know very well that if even once the sensation of the climax of what is called the Uman-Vanosinian process occurs in what is called the nervous system of their children before they reach majority, they will already never have the full possibility of normal mentation when they become adult, and hence it is that such cultured parents always consider it their first and chief duty towards their children to educate them in this respect. Unlike most contemporary parents, they do not consider that the education of children consists in badgering them to learn by rote as much poetry as possible, composed by Mordor tennis psychopaths, or in teaching them to click their heels well before their acquaintances, in which accomplishments, according to the notions of people of recent times, the whole education of children unfortunately consists. And so, my dear friend, and though very depraved, yet nevertheless sympathetic young man, these two rites were created by the great Moses and introduced then into the ordinary life of the Judaic people, in order to counteract that maleficent invention of clothes, thanks to which those factors were destroyed which were provided by nature for the protection of these organs from the harmful action of the substances given off by them. And these two rites were transmitted from generation to generation, both to the followers of this Judaic religion themselves, as well as to others who took over these useful rites almost unchanged. And it was only after the death of the great King Solomon that the rite XLII ceased for some reason or other to be performed even by the followers of the Judaic religion, and only the rite Sikt Nerchorn automatically continued to be performed and reached the contemporary representatives of that race. And this custom, together with many other ancient Judaic customs, also reached the followers of the Christian religion, who at first observed it very strictly in their everyday life. But very soon, both this custom itself and even the information about its adoption among them similarly quickly disappeared from among the followers of this then still new religion. Yes, my dear friend, if only the teaching of the divine Jesus Christ were carried out in full conformity with its original, then the religion, unprecedentedly wisely founded on it, would not only be the best of all existing religions, but even of all religions which may arise and exist in the future. Except for the custom of polygamy, there is nothing in the Mohammedan religion which was not also in the Judaic as well as in the Christian teachings. The custom of polygamy, established on the basis of the scientific deductions of the then famous Arabian learned being Nasulan el-Aul, was introduced into the everyday life of people in general after the period of the founding of the Christian religion. Your religion arose much later, and its contents were intentionally restricted by its great creators, who had it in mind to lay particular stress on certain everyday customs. They did this because, at that time, there were clearly manifest both the decline of the Christian religion and the disappearance in ordinary people of the capacity for contemplation, that is, for the state in which alone the truths indicated in the detailedly genuine religious teachings can be understood. Having noticed all this, the great creators of the Mohammedan religion decided, on the one hand, to simplify the teaching itself, and on the other hand, to emphasize certain customs, so that the everyday life of the followers of this new teaching, who had lost the capacity for contemplation and consequently the possibility of understanding truths consciously, might at least mechanically flow more or less tolerably. Just at that time, among other customs, they established and laid particular stress on the customs you mentioned of sunniyat, abdest, and polygamy, the beneficial results of which we can see even now in practice. For example, as you yourself have justly observed, thanks to circumcision and ablution, one rarely finds among the followers of this religion either onanism or certain venereal diseases, and thanks to polygamy, we see among the followers of this religion such a reciprocal, so to say, psycho-organic maintenance of the foundation of family life as is almost entirely absent among the followers of the Christian religion. Of the useful customs originally contained in the Christian religion, and which were introduced by the creators of that religion into the life of its followers for the preservation of health and for the maintenance of the foundations of morality necessary for a happy life, nothing now remains except the custom of periodic fasting, that is, of abstaining at certain times of the year from the consumption of certain edible products. And even this one surviving good custom is either already fading completely out of the ordinary life of the followers of this religion, or its observance is so changing year by year that no shock is obtained from it for the fasters, though it was just for that shock that this fast was established. The changes now taking place in the process of this Christian custom of fasting are very characteristic and provide an excellent example for understanding how, in general, all the good Christian customs have little by little undergone change until they have finally entirely ceased to exist. A good illustration is the present-day observance of this fast by those called the Russian Orthodox Christians. These Russian Orthodox Christians took their religion entirely from those called the Orthodox Greeks, from whom, together with many other Christian customs, this same custom of fasting also passed to them. Most of the millions of these Russian Orthodox Christians still continue to fast, as is said, rigorously, in conformity with what is called the Orthodox Code, now existing there. But as to the manner of their fasting, one cannot help recalling the saying of our dear Mullah Nasser ad-Din in such cases: "Isn't it all the same if I sing like a donkey, as long as they call me a nightingale?" The fasting of these Russian Orthodox Christians is just a case of this kind. As long as they are called Christians, and moreover Orthodox, even though they receive no shock whatever from the fast, is it not all the same? As I have already said, these Russian Orthodox Christians, even of the present time, very strictly observe the seasons and the days of the fasts indicated in the aforesaid codes. But as to what should and should not be consumed as food during a fast, just in that question is buried the left paw of the curly-haired dog of the ex-Emperor Wilhelm. You will clearly understand how these contemporary Russian Orthodox Christians fast if I repeat to you the exact words of one of these genuine Russian Orthodox Christians spoken to me not long ago there in Russia. I used to meet this Russian there on certain business, and even became somewhat friendly with him and visited him in his home. He was considered by those around him a very good Christian and the patriarchal father of a family. He was descended from what they call the Old Believers. Here, my boy, you might as well know that certain of the beings who compose this large group Russia are called by the rest Old Believers. Old Believers is the name given to those Orthodox Christians whose ancestors, several centuries ago, declined to accept the new rules then laid down by somebody or other for Russian Orthodox Christians, but remained faithful followers of the previously existing rules, also laid down by somebody or other, only a century or two before the given religious schism, such as usually occurs among them from time to time. And so, the said worthy Russian Old Believer, I continued to the young Persian, once when we were dining together at his house, in the company of several other Russians, also Orthodox Christians, turned to me and said, "Oh dear! By the way, I must tell you that it is common among the beings of this group there, after the second glass of genuine Russian vodka, to call their acquaintances by various pet names, such as, 'Oh dear,' 'my Zapupunchik,' 'my pot-belly beauty,' 'my little brown jug,' and so on and so forth. And so this worthy, genuine Orthodox Christian, addressing me as 'Old dear,' said, 'Never mind, old dear, we shall soon be having Lent, and then we shall feast together on real Russian dishes.' To tell the truth, here in Russia we almost always eat the same things during the meat periods. But it is quite a different story during the fasts, especially during Lent. Not a day passes but one is privileged to see some of the most tasty dishes. You know what, old dear? I made the other day a remarkably interesting discovery on this subject. This new discovery of mine is miles above the discovery of that old codger Copernicus, who, when he was once lying dead drunk on the ground, clearly sensed, it seems, that the earth goes round. Ah, what a marvel! What a discovery! In our own Mother Moscow alone, hundreds of thousands of such discoveries are probably made every day. No, my discovery is a real one, and exceedingly instructive and substantial. This discovery of mine is that we have all been complete fools and hopeless idiots ever to have imagined and been fairly convinced that for the host of good, varied, and most tasty dishes during Lent, we are indebted to the famous art of our chefs and cooks. On the day, peculiarly blessed for those near to me, when I become worthy to understand this truth, that is to say, when our incomparable Dunyasha finally succeeded in placing within the layers of the pie for the Gromwell fish soup with turbot livers a series of secondary layers, I understood with my whole being that this had been a great mistake on our part. First, I understood this myself, and afterwards I proved it to the whole of my household, that if we have so many varied and most tasty dishes during Lent, we are indebted only to our blessed and glorious fishes alone. During fasts, and especially during Lent, our homes are made happy by the frequent visits of the most honorable sturgeon and the estimable starlet, and the respected dried sturgeon, and the ever-memorable turbot, and Her Illustrious Highness the salmon, and the musical white sturgeon, and the serenely plastic mackerel, and the eternally angry pike, and the ever-demure guinead, and the leaping alive trout, and the beauty trioshka, and the proud shamai, and that worthy personality bream, and all our other like benefactors and protectors. Merely the names alone of these our givers of good and felicity are already for us the greatest gift of God. When we hear their names, our hearts almost leap within us. These names of theirs are not just names, but real music. Can one really compare the sounds of the music invented there by various Beethovenings and Chopinings and other fashionable triflers with the sounds of the names of those blessed fishes? Every time we hear the names of these glorious creations, a state of bliss flows within us and courses through our veins and nerves. Ah, blessed fishes, first created by our Creator, have mercy on us and sustain us also in these meat days. Amen. After this prayer, this worthy Orthodox Russian Christian drained a monster glass of genuine refined Russian vodka and stared fondly at a little statue of Venus and Psyche, which stood nearby. And indeed, my friend, almost every Russian Orthodox Christian has a similar idea of fasting and a similar attitude towards it. During these Christian fasts, which passed to them from the Orthodox Greeks, they all eat the flesh of fish. It is not considered a sin among them to eat the flesh of fish, and they eat it heartily as a fast dish. I personally find only one thing incomprehensible: from where did these Russian sorry Orthodox get the idea that during the Christian fasts, especially during Lent, the flesh of fish may be eaten? I find it incomprehensible because the Orthodox Christians from whom they took this religion, namely the Greeks, neither in the past nor in the present have ever eaten or do eat the flesh of fish during fasts. Even the Greeks of today eat fish during Lent only on one day, and even then in accordance with the code of the Orthodox Church, in memory of a day associated with the divine Jesus Christ. The result of a fast permitting the consumption of the flesh of fish not only gives no shock at all to the fasters, but is even directly contrary to what the divine Jesus Christ himself intended and taught, and for which this custom was established by the great creators of this Christian religion. In confirmation of what I have just told you, you might as well, my young friend, listen to what I once chanced to read about Christian fasting in an ancient Judaic Essenian manuscript. In this ancient Judaic Essenian manuscript, it was stated that the custom established for the followers of the teaching of Jesus Christ of fasting at certain times of the year was instituted long after his death, namely in the 214th year after his birth. The custom of fasting was instituted and introduced into the Christian religion by the great secret Chalcedonian Council. This secret Chalcedonian Council was convened by all the followers of the then still new teaching of Jesus Christ in the locality of Kalnuk, lying on the shores of the Dead Sea. Hence, it is known in the history of the Christian religion as the XLII Council. And it was held in secret because the followers of the teaching of Jesus Christ were then everywhere rigorously persecuted by the power-possessing people. The power-possessing people persecuted them because they greatly feared that if people lived according to this teaching, then, although they themselves, namely the power-possessing people, could also live very well, yet all the motives for displaying their power would disappear, and thereby those shocks would cease, the satisfaction of which evoke the tickling of their inner God named self-love. It was just during that XLII Council that its members first laid down the rule that the followers of the teaching of Jesus Christ should on certain days abstain from consuming certain edible products for food. And the initial cause of the institution of this fast was the dispute at this XLII Council between two then famous learned men, namely the great Hertunano and the great Greek philosopher Vigendiadi. The great Hertunano was the representative of all the followers of the teaching of Jesus Christ settled on the shores of the Red Sea, while the philosopher Vigendiadi was the representative of all the then followers of that teaching in Greece. The philosopher Vigendiadi was famous for his learning only in his own country, but Hertunano was famous all over the earth. He was considered the greatest authority on the laws of the inner organization of man, and also an authority on the science then called alchemy, not, of course, the alchemic science of which contemporary people have a notion, and which they express by the same word. The famous dispute between the great Hertunano and Vigendiadi arose on the following occasion. The philosopher Vigendiadi, it seems, occupied 2 days in affirming and proving that it was absolutely necessary to spread among all the followers of the teachings of Jesus the notion that to kill animals for the purpose of consuming their flesh for food was the greatest sin, and moreover that such flesh was very harmful to the health, and so on. After the philosopher Vigendiadi, several other representatives ascended the rostrum and spoke for or against his case. Finally, as this manuscript stated, the great Hertunano, with measured dignity, slowly mounted the rostrum and spoke in the manner proper to him, clearly and calmly. According to the text of this manuscript, he then spoke as follows. I fully concur in all the evidence and arguments set forth here by our brother in Christ, the philosopher Vigendiadi. I, for my part, will even add to all he has said that to cut short other lives merely to stuff one's own belly is an infamy of infamies, such as only man is capable of. Had I not also been interested in this question for many years, and had I not reached certain entirely different, definite conclusions, then after all that our brother in Christ, Vigendiadi, has said here, I should not hesitate a moment, but should urge and conjure you all not to delay until tomorrow, but without looking behind, to hasten back to your towns, and there, in the public squares, to cry aloud, Stop, stop, people! Consume no more meat for food. This practice of yours is not only contrary to all the commandments of God, but is the cause of all your diseases. As you see, I do not do this now, and I do not do so only because during my long years of unremitting study of this question, I have, as I have already told you, arrived at an entirely different definite conclusion. Concerning the definite conclusion at which I have arrived, I can now tell you only this, that it will never happen on the earth that all people will profess one and the same religion. Hence, in addition to our Christian religion, other religions will always exist, and it is not possible to be certain that the followers of those other religions will also abstain from consuming meat. But if we cannot now be certain that at some time or other all people on earth will abstain from meat, then we must now, as regards the consumption of meat, take quite other, more practicable measures, because if one part of mankind consumes meat, and the other part does not, then, according to the results of my experimental investigations, the greatest of evils, than which nothing could be worse, would befall the people who did not consume meat. Namely, as my detailed experiments have shown me, among people who do not consume meat, but who nevertheless live among those who do, the formation ceases of what is called willpower. My experiments prove to me that although when they abstain from meat, people's bodily health improves, nevertheless, when such abstainers find themselves mixing with those who consume meat, their psychic state inevitably grows worse, in spite of the fact that the state of their organism may at the same time sometimes improve. Thus, a good result for people who abstain from meat can be obtained exclusively only if they live always in complete isolation. As regards the people who constantly consume meat, or those products which contain the element called eknok, although the appearance of the state of their organism undergoes no change, nevertheless their psyche, especially its chief feature, which is sometimes designated by the general word, the character of man, gradually changes in regard to positiveness and morality for the worse, beyond all recognition. I must tell you that I made all these deductions from the experiments I was enabled to conduct over a period of many years, thanks to two good philanthropic men, namely to the rich shepherd XLII and his money, and to the scientist we all respect, XLII, with his remarkable invention, the apparatus Arostodesok. By means of this said remarkable apparatus, Arostodesok, I was enabled for several years to register daily the general state of the organism of all those thousands of people who lived under test conditions at the expense of the Good Shepherd XLII. May our Creator multiply his flocks. Well then, when thanks to these experimental researches of mine, I became clearly convinced that if people continue to consume meat for their food, it will be very bad for them, and that on the other hand, if only some of them should abstain, no good would come of this either. I thereafter devoted myself entirely for a time to finding out what could nevertheless be done for the future welfare of the majority of the people. At the outset, I then established for myself two categorical propositions. The first, that people accustomed for so many centuries to consuming meat for their food would never, with their weak wills, be able to make themselves cease consuming it in order to overcome this criminal tendency of theirs. And the second, that even if people should decide not to eat meat, and should in fact keep their decision for a certain time, and should even lose the habit of eating meat, they would nevertheless never be able to abstain from eating it for a significant length of time to acquire a total aversion to it. They would not be able to do so because never on the earth will it occur that all people will have the same religion or form a single government, without which condition there can never exist common to all any suggestive, prohibitive, penal, or other kind of compulsory influence, owing to which alone people possessing in general the property of being stimulated by example, aroused by envy, and influenced magnetically, might be enabled to keep forever a resolution once taken. Notwithstanding these two facts, incontestably clear in my conviction, I nevertheless, with these facts as the basis of my subsequent researches, persevered in my search for some possible way of escape from the unhappy situation confronting people. Of course, all my further investigations on a large scale proceeded again with the aid of the inexhaustible wealth of the herdsman, XLII, and the wonderful apparatus of the wise XLII. The results of these last researches of mine made it clear to me that although in general people's psyche does indeed deteriorate from the constant introduction into the organism of the substance eknok, yet this substance has a particularly harmful effect only at certain times of the year. So, my brethren in Christ, from all I have said, and chiefly from the experimental observations which I made on people daily during a whole year, and which clearly showed me that the intensity of the harmful effect of the substance eknok decreases at certain times of the year, I can now confidently express my personal opinion that if the custom would be spread and confirmed among the followers of the teachings of Jesus Christ, of abstaining during at least certain times of the year from the use of these products, in the formations of which that substance eknok takes a special part, then if such a measure could conceivably be put into effect, it would bring the people a certain amount of benefit. As my numerous alchemic investigations have shown me, the substance eknok participates in the formation of the organism of all lives, without exception, breeding on the surface of the earth, as well as within its different spheres, as for instance within the earth, in the water, in the atmosphere, and so on. This substance is present also in everything which exists for the formation of the said organism, as for example in the vascular fluid of every pregnant female of every kind of life, and in such products as milk, eggs, caviar, etc. The ideas expressed by the great Herr Tunano so astounded and agitated all the members of that Kalnuanian council that the commotion made it impossible for the great Herr Tunano to continue speaking, and he was compelled to abandon his speech and descend from the rostrum. It was further said in that manuscript that the day's result was a unanimous decision on the part of the members of the Kalnuanian council to fix, with the help of the great Herr Tunano, those times of the year when the substance eknok had more harmful effects on people, and to spread widely among the followers of Jesus Christ the custom of fasting at these times of the year, that is, of abstaining at certain times of the year from products containing the, for them, harmful substance eknok. With this, that Judaic Essenian manuscript ended. As you see from this, the creators of this custom had in view that the followers of that religion should abstain at the fixed times from those products which contain the substance very harmful for their health, and particularly to their psyche. But the Russian sorry Orthodox Christians, who consider themselves faithful followers of that great religion, also fast, but during their fast they eat the flesh of fish. That is to say, they eat just those organisms which contain, according to the researches of the great Herr Tunano, that harmful substance eknok, precisely to guard them against which that wise and salutary custom was created. And with that, my boy, I then concluded my conversation with that sympathetic young Persian concerning the destruction and transformation by contemporary beings of these good customs which were handed down from the ancient days of their wise ancestors. Our incomparable Mullah Nasr ad-Din has also a very apt and wise sentence. People, people, why are you people? If only you were not people, you might perhaps be clever. A favorite saying of the American Uncle Sam also does very well to define the same idea. It is said that when Uncle Sam from America happens to have drunk a little more gin than usual, he always says during a pause, "When nothing's right, only then, all is right." But for myself, I will only say, in this case, wicked moon. At any rate, my dear boy, I must admit that certain customs existing there, which have reached the contemporary favorites of yours from remote antiquity, are exceedingly good for the ordinary existence of the beings of certain communities there.